Chapter 1500, Perfect Trap next. What? The members of the cohort all stared at Mordred, their expressions grim. Noticing their reaction, he smiled. I was rather surprised to learn about the identities of these 6 plagues, but it seems that you are already familiar with them. Good. It will spare me the explanations. At that moment Jet, who had been keeping quiet until then, finally spoke. Soul Stealer is here in Twilight. Mordred remained silent for a few moments. Eventually he sighed. He is. I've been playing hide and seek with him for gods, I don't even know how long. Time is a funny concept here in Twilight, really. And let me tell you, there is no worse company than a demented nightmare creature version of yourself. He remained silent for a moment, then added matter-of-factly. He's not the only one either. The Dread Lord is here too. Sunny flinched, experienced a visceral reaction to those words. Damnation. Suddenly he felt vulnerable and exposed, surrounded by terrible danger. None of them had felt safe while approaching Twilight, but still. The sense of pure dread he felt at the mention of the ruler of Verge was almost palpable. It was not that Sunny was afraid of the Dread Lord. He knew that the cohort would have to clash with the leader of the plagues eventually. But facing him already was simply too unexpected, too sudden. What the hell is happening? Twilight was supposed to be their last stop before the final battle, not the final battle itself. How could the Tyrant of Verge already be here, within reach? How could they already be in his grasp? Nephise gripped the hilt of her sword, clearly thinking the same. Mordred, meanwhile, shook his head. Oh, please forgive me. I should have mentioned first that you don't have to worry about the Dread Lord. He can't harm us. In fact, Soul Stealer can't harm us either unless we enter his territory. They are just as trapped as I am, and your friend Nightingale is. Sunny let out a frustrated sigh. Can you just explain what is going on, damn it? Mordred gave him an amused glance. Why, certainly. I was just getting to it. But I've been waiting for this moment for so long. It will be a shame not to enjoy it. He looked at each of them with a pleasant smile, and then shrugged. Where do I start? First, as you might have noticed, there was a terrible battle here in Twilight countless years ago. The forces of defilement, that is what it's called, right, wanted to destroy the city, while the warriors of Twilight naturally wanted to prevent it from happening. He sighed theatrically. Sadly, they failed. Suffering terrible losses, the abominations broke through the outer barrier and breached the walls of the city. From what I gathered, that was possible because the defiled legion was led by the Dread Lord, as well as my own corrupted self. Mind you, everything I know was observed while exploring the mirrored version of Twilight. I haven't spoken to a soul since entering the nightmare, so my information might be wrong or incomplete. Mordred remained silent for a moment. In any case, from the looks of it, the walls were breached, and the Dread Lord entered the city with the remaining nightmare creatures. The streets of Twilight are a battlefield, countless humans desperately fighting against the abominations and their terrible master, while some seem to be turning into abominations themselves. It's a proper mess. There was something strange about what he had said. Nephise tilted her head a little. Our battlefield, not we're a battlefield. The Prince of Nothing nodded with a dark smile. Indeed, in the midst of this titanic battle, you see, someone activated the enchantment array of the city. A truly powerful sorcery was awakened, its influence swallowing all of Twilight. Sunny groaned inwardly. Windflower did tell me about it, didn't she? That the defensive array of Twilight was similar to the vast enchantment of Alethia's island. Both even used a fragment of the estuary as a core. He sighed. Don't tell me, does the same day keep repeating itself in Twilight? Mordred gave him a strange look. What? No, what gave you such an odd idea? That would be quite bizarre. Sunny stared back at him, confused. Then, what did the activation of the defensive array do? The Prince of Nothing lingered for a moment, then smiled. Well, simply put, it froze time. The members of the cohort stared at him incredulously. Froze time. Effie's voice sounded a bit exasperated, as if she was tired of time behaving in all the wrong ways here, on the great river. And who could blame her? Sonny felt the same. Hearing her tone, Mordred smiled. Ah, it seems like you have experienced more than your fair share of strangeness here in the tomb of Ariel. But answering your question, yes, it froze time. The moment the defensive array was activated, time inside Twilight completely stopped. And so, the battle raging on its streets stopped as well. He shook his head. The citizens and warriors of Twilight are standing there like statues, frozen in strange poses. The nightmare creatures are the same. Even the dread Lord, despite all his power and authority, was caught in the trap. Now, he's more of a monument to the ruler of Verge, as opposed to an actual tyrant. Mordred's face grew somber. Of course, none of them are truly dead, just caught between two moments forever. If one day the defensive array is deactivated, the battle will resume and the dread Lord will awaken. Don't think that you can kill him while he's vulnerable too. The moment you step inside Twilight, the time will stop for you as well. Even inanimate objects will be frozen in time. It's a perfect trap. He chuckled. If a little desperate, why would the people of Twilight activate the array before evacuating the city? I don't know. What I do know, though, is that the spell played a cruel prank on me. And Nightingale. Sonny had yet to recover from the news that the dread Lord, someone who was supposed to be their ultimate enemy in this nightmare, turned out to have already been removed from the board by someone. He did not need to guess the identity of that someone, really. Who could have manipulated the events of the Siege of Twilight? It had to have been the Mad Prince himself, who had stabbed his master in the back. And while Sonny was reeling from the news, the meaning of the last words spoken by Mordred finally reached his mind. His eyes narrowed. Wait. Nephi's was the first one to speak. What do you mean? What did the spell do? Mordred looked at them with a dark expression. Isn't it obvious? The roles it assigned to me and Nightingale were warriors of Twilight. Therefore, the moment we entered the nightmare, we were already caught in frozen time, stuck in an inescapable trap. He chuckled wryly. My physical body is also there, standing like a statue in the middle of a frozen battle. So is Nightingale's. It's just that my reflection had escaped into the mirror realm, but for him, not a single moment has passed since the start of the nightmare. He doesn't even know what fate has befallen him. The Prince of Nothing shook his head with resentment. Oh, and there's another creature in Twilight who is in a similar situation to mine. Soul Stealer, that monster. While my realm is modest in size, his encompasses all reflections in the city. I don't know where his physical body is hidden, but his reflection is prowling the mirrored Twilight, and it is dreadful enough to give me fright. He grew silent for a moment, and then smiled. There, I think I explained the important parts. I'm sure you have questions. Nephi's gave him a long look, then nodded. I have a question. If I understood it correctly, are you trying to say? White sparks ignited in her eyes. That there is an army of awakened warriors, countless thousands of them, inside Twilight, all waiting for the defensive array to be deactivated, so that they could resume the battle against the defilement. Sonny should have expected what question Nephi's would ask. The dread Lord was in Twilight. Soul Stealer was there, as well. The city itself was frozen in time. Finally, the truth of how it had been lost was revealed. But what mattered most was that there was also an army of human warriors there. All the people from the Twilight Sea, except for those who had perished during the Siege of Verge and the subsequent retaliation of the defiled horde. Could they really be saved by deactivating the defensive array? Sonny had just the memory to do it. However, the things Mordred had shared with them, changed the entire game. Sure, the question Nephi's had asked was reasonable. The primary goal of coming to Twilight was to rescue Kai, but they had harbored a tentative hope of finding more allies here as well. Now, even if there was a caveat, it seemed that their hope could come true. But why was it that they needed allies to begin with? It was to have enough forces in order to attack Verge, which was supposed to be guarded by the Legion of Defiled Abominations and the 6 Plagues. Now 3 of the plagues were gone. Of the remaining 3, 2 were trapped here in Twilight. Numerous defiled had either perished or become frozen in time here as well. Then didn't it mean that Verge was far more vulnerable than they had ever expected? Vulnerable enough so that the cohort had a chance of destroying the first Seeker without the aid of powerful allies, perhaps. It was as though the only ally they needed was the Mad Prince. A subtle frown appeared on Sunny's face. Aren't I putting too much trust into a nightmare creature? Sure, the vile madman's motives seemed to align with his, but to what degree? And could an ending envisioned by a demented abomination truly fit what Sunny wanted to achieve? It could not. For example, Sunny would have never massacred Weave and treated Anank so cruelly, but for the Mad Prince, it was a perfectly acceptable course of action. Who was to say that the bastard had not planned for something similar to happen again? What else would he have been willing to sacrifice in order to achieve his goal? Doubt, Sunny was full of doubt. Mordred, meanwhile, raised an eyebrow with an amused smile. He studied Nephi's for a few moments, then answered in a pleasant tone. Why, although I can't be entirely sure, it appears so. Yes, there seems to be an army of awakened warriors in Twilight, all waiting to resume the battle against the defilement. He paused briefly. Do remember that there is also an army of the nightmare creatures there, complete with 2 dreadful defiled champions. But what of it? The point is moot. Unless you have discovered a method to control the defensive array of Twilight during your travels, of course. Mordred looked at each of them in turn, and then asked with a hint of curiosity. Have you? Jet raised her eyebrow slightly. You seem to be strangely certain that we have. The Prince of Nothing chuckled. I'll admit it. Yes, I am quite confident that you do indeed possess the means of lifting the curse enveloping Twilight. The spell is always fair, after all, in its own perverse way. Granted, I find its treatment very distasteful this time around. I have been left with no choice but to rely on others to help me escape this predicament, more or less. He smiled. But that is exactly why I believe that you, the others in question, must have a way of helping me free myself. Otherwise, the spell would have been entirely unreasonable, which it never is. Sunny scoffed. Help you? Do we have a reason to help you? All of us are in this mess because of you. If it wasn't for you and your schemes, the Battle of the Black Skull would have never happened, and we wouldn't have ended up in this damned nightmare. Mordred studied him with a friendly smile, then shrugged nonchalantly. Such a small trifle. Are you still mad about it? You should really learn how to let go of past grievances and forgive people, Sunless. Holding on to spite is a terrible way to live a life. Just look at me. You spoke so convincingly about not wanting to serve the great clans, then went and joined the army of valor anyway. But am I mad? No, I graciously forgave you a long time ago. He looked at them with reproach, waited for a few moments and shrugged. Well, if that does not convince you, there is still your friend Nightingale. You might not feel very motivated to help me, but what about him? You aren't going to leave him to rot in Twilight, are you? Sunny glared at the Prince of Nothing for a bit, then grimaced and shook his head. No, most likely. And yes, we do have a way to control the defensive array. However, it is not a given that we should. He looked at Nephi's and said, his voice somber. As I see it, we have 2 choices. One is to enter Twilight, deactivate the array. then try to kill the Dread Lord and Soul Stealer with the help of Daron's army. If we survive, the 7 of us will lead that army to besiege Verge and finish off Torment and the First Seeker." His expression darkened. "The other choice is to leave Twilight without facing the Dread Lord and go directly to Verge, just the 5 of us. There can't be that many defiled left there, serving Torment. It will be dangerous, of course, but perhaps less dangerous than fighting the Dread Lord and Soul Stealer." Mordred coughed. "Aren't you forgetting something? Abandoning your friend to avoid danger. Ah, how heartless. Really, Sunless, I thought better of you." Sunny gave him a dirty look. "Who is abandoning who? If we manage to destroy the First Seeker, the nightmare will be over. Both of you will return to the waking world as saints without having done anything." Mordred shook his head. "What if you fail? At the risk of sounding presumptuous, you know what I am capable of. Don't you think that having me with you will increase our chances of escaping the nightmare? 7 is much better than 5 anyway. There is no reason to settle for less when you can have more." Sunny remained silent for a while, then sighed and looked at Nephi's. Honestly, he found himself agreeing with Mordred, not only because having the Prince of Nothing fighting by their side would be a boon during the assault on Verge, but simply because leaving Kai behind did not sit right with him. Sunny was not a superstitious man, but he knew more about fate than most. Sure, in theory, a person could conquer a nightmare without contributing anything to its completion. But in practice, the spell was never that kind. One way or the other, trying to hide and bide your time almost always invited disaster. So, even if there was no logical reason to worry about Kai, Sunny had a feeling that simply leaving their friend frozen in time would not end well, both for him and for them. After hesitating for a few moments, he shook his head. "I don't know, Neph, it's your decision." She glanced at him, then shrugged. Her answer was just as he had expected. "What is there to decide? Let's kill the Dread Lord. We'll go conquer the nightmare after he is dead." Nephi's remained silent for a few moments, then shook her hand and gripped the hilt of her sword. Sparks of white flame were still dancing in her beautiful gray eyes. "I am not suggesting it rashly. We have already faced 2 of the 6 plagues, so we know how fearsome they are." Mordred looked at her in surprise. "Wait, you did?" She nodded. "Yes, there were unique circumstances that allowed us to exploit their flaws. As a result, Undying Slaughter killed Devouring Beast and was then finished off by the 5 of us. She had been greatly weakened, and still, we barely managed to survive that battle." Nephi's glanced at Sunny. Then, a hint of a smile appeared on her lips. Glancing at Mordred, she said, "Oh, and Sunny personally erased the Mad Prince from existence, so thoroughly that there's not even a corpse left. So, the 6 plagues are now down to 3. Sunny stared at her incredulously. Everything she had said was technically true. The Mad Prince had indeed been erased from existence by Sunny, because Sunny was the Mad Prince. There had not been a corpse left by the transition either. But why did it sound so misleading and outrageous? Did she just steal a page from my book? Was it really the right time to tease him? Nephi's, meanwhile, ignored the amused smile on Mordred's lips and continued. In any case, I am not underestimating the threat posed by the Dread Lord and Soul Stealer. I would not have suggested facing them directly in other circumstances, at least not without being able to thoroughly prepare a battlefield of our choosing. But the situation is different here, in Twilight. Here, we'll have an army of allies on our side. This might very well be the best chance of slaying these monsters we'll ever have, one I am unwilling to pass by." She remained silent for a few moments, then sighed. "However, I will not force anyone to follow this plan. You'll have to decide for yourself." As soon as she was done talking, Mordred smiled brightly. "Why, I think that it is a great plan. Lady Changing Star, you are truly wise. Your exalted reputation is very well deserved, it seems. How wonderful." His smile was perfectly sincere, but Sonny knew the bastard well enough to guess what he was really thinking. Something like, "It's just a shame that I'll have to gruesomely kill you in the future. Well, since it's inevitable, I might as well try to enjoy the process when the day comes." Sonny's eyes darkened. He stared at Mordred for a bit, then spat through gritted teeth. "I don't mind killing Soul Stealer. Oh, and the Dread Lord either." Jet simply shrugged. "We'll only ever challenge a third nightmare once. Might as well do it right." Effie was the last to speak. Holding her belly, she hesitated for a bit, then smiled. "I mean, we're not really going to leave Kai in this pit, are we? Let's come up with a good plan and crush those bastards. Or, if we can't, let's grab Kai and run away in the chaos. I'm sure we can manage that at least." Finally, all eyes settled on Nephi's. She nodded solemnly and looked at Mordred. Her face was motionless, with only the white flames dancing in the depths of her striking gray eyes. "See, Lord Mordred, we are willing to help you escape Twilight. However, there is a condition." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, do tell what you have in mind." She remained silent for a while, studying him, then said in an even tone, "As I already mentioned, we were able to slay Undying Slaughter. However, it wasn't because we were more powerful than her. Instead, it was because we managed to exploit her flaw. Since the plagues are defiled versions of ourselves, the knowledge of their flaws is the best weapon we possess." Nephi's crossed her arms and added, her expression somber, "Sadly, the Dread Lord does not possess a flaw that we can exploit. That already robs us of our main advantage. As for Soul Stealer, we simply don't know what his flaw is. Only you know that. So, if you want our help, you'll have to share that knowledge, at least in case it can help us defeat him." Mordred looked at them with a pleasant smile. Then he laughed. "You want to know what my flaw is? How daring! Should I help you tie a noose around my neck while we're at it?" Nephi's did not respond, simply staring at him with her radiant eyes. Slowly the smile disappeared from Mordred's face. He sighed, then shook his head with a reluctant expression. "Forget it. Soul Stealer's flaw cannot help you kill him anyway, because it's not here." Confused, Sonny gave him a long look. "What do you mean it's not here?" Mordred shrugged. "I mean just that. My flaw is not here in the nightmare. I didn't bring it along. It would be quite foolish to carry something that dangerous around, wouldn't it?" His expression was a bit dejected, as if he was not happy about having to share even that little piece of information with them. Sonny, meanwhile, was stunned. What kind of flaw can be carried around or left behind? Does it exist outside Mordred? He had never heard about a flaw like that. But then again, he had never heard about someone like the Prince of Nothing. Divine aspects were both extremely rare and bizarre, so who was to say that Mordred's flaw wasn't just as odd? Nephi sighed. "So how do we kill him?" Mordred grimaced. "Kill him? It's not going to be easy. As you might know, I am famously hard to kill." He hesitated for a moment, then pointed to Sonny. "Soul Stealer won't die if you destroy his physical body. He might not even die if you destroy his soul. To truly get rid of him, we'll need to destroy his reflection. And there are only two ways to achieve that." The Prince of Nothing paused, then reluctantly shared the secret of how he could be killed. "First is to defeat him in a soul battle when he tries to take possession of your body. Of all of us here, Sunless has the best chance of accomplishing something like that, perhaps changing Star as well. Followed by me. No offense, but the rest of you don't stand a chance." Effie and Jet shrugged in unison. "None taken." Cassie, who had remained silent before, finally spoke. "What is the second way?" Mordred nodded. "The second way is to destroy his physical body while there are no other bodies around, and no reflections for him to flee into either. Needless to say, that way is not very feasible. So, We'll have to somehow lure him into the soul of either Sunless, Lady Nephis, or me." His face suddenly grew dim. "Mind you, even I don't know what Soul Stealer's transformation ability is, so he might give us a nasty surprise. In fact, I'm pretty sure that he will." Sunny smiled darkly. "That's all right. We are full of surprises as well. Not the least of which is that the Mad Prince is supporting us from beyond the grave. He knew that I would receive the crown of Twilight. He also knew that I'd come to see Wind Flower and learn about its connection to the defensive array of this city. The mad bastard had most likely trapped the Dread Lord and Soul Stealer in frozen time himself, while I'll be the one to release them. Surely all of it is not a coincidence." Nephis nodded. "Let us share information. After learning everything you know about Twilight, we will come up with a plan and prepare." A strange faint smile appeared on her lips. "And then we will make sure that the 3 plagues are no more and only torment remains. We will win." Sunny and his companions had come to Twilight expecting a battle, and now that battle was swiftly approaching. The identity of the enemy was far more fearsome than they had expected as well. In fact, it was far too fearsome, while the scope of the battle was far too great. The situation had changed too fast, leaving Sunny shaken. It's strange. He had spent how long? Around 8 months in this nightmare. It was already longer than his stay in the Kingdom of Hope had been, and that was without even considering the long stretches of time that passed without being experienced by him. But still, Sunny had not expected the culmination of the nightmare to happen so suddenly. And that was what the battle in Twilight promised to be, the most dreadful and deadly confrontation they would experience in the tomb of Ariel. The threat Verge posed paled in comparison to it. If they were to win here, in this lost and forsaken city, the rest of the nightmare would be simply an epilogue. Of course, that was only so because of Nephis and her longing. Still, Sunny was struggling to adjust to the shifting landscape of the nightmare. Nevertheless, he was ready. Now, there were 6 challengers working together to pass the dreadful trial of the spell. Well, 5.5, considering that Mordred's physical body was frozen beyond the walls of Twilight. 3 of them possessed divine aspects. 2 were among the most deadly masters in the world. There was Cassie as well, whom Sunny could not even place into any kind of power hierarchy. Together, they tried to come up with a plan to kill the Dread Lord and liberate Twilight. Or rather, an approach. There was too little information and too many unknown factors to formulate a specific plan. The best they could do was learn everything there was to learn and come up with various strategies, then switch between them according to the situation. Finally, there was nothing left to discuss. Standing in the mirror version of the floating fortress once again, the 6 of them looked beyond its walls, into the twilight haze of dawn. Mordred was strangely withdrawn. Eventually, he smiled. "There is no point in wasting time. Remember, stay close to me at all times. I will try to hide us from Soul Stealer's gaze as best I can." He paused for a moment, and then added nonchalantly, "Of course, we can still stumble upon that monster directly. If that happens, well, at least it will be painless." With a chuckle, he jumped over the battlement and swiftly climbed down the crumbling wall of the fortress. The rest of them followed, careful not to make too much noise. Luckily, there were no spikes protruding from the base of the fortress on the other side. Sunny and his companions were able to descend easily, stepping on the carapace of a dead behemoth that floated in the still water below the wall. Mordred was already there, waiting for them. The chain barrier protecting the city was broken, but it was not the only defensive measure prepared by Twilight. The Dread Lord paid a heavy price to reach the city wall. Ah, but you can see for yourselves, a thrilling sight, isn't it? Sunny did not share his enthusiasm. The surface of the great river in front of them was covered by a carpet of giant corpses. The abominations that had perished here had been terribly mangled, their grotesque bodies littered with ghastly wounds. Here and there, Broken ships were floating in still water, with masts that rose into the haze like dead trees. Taking a step forward, Mordred headed to the edge of the carapace. We can move freely here in the mirror realm. If we weren't in a reflection, however, the frozen time would have already started to envelop us. The most insidious part is that we would have been none the wiser. Eventually, our time would have halted entirely without us ever knowing. Ah, what a terrible fate. Reaching the point where the carapace of the dead abomination disappeared underwater, he easily jumped onto the next one and beckoned them to follow. Come, the sooner we reach the heart of the city, the better. Together, the six of them traversed the dreadful field of floating corpses. With each step, Sonny felt his mood turning more and more grave. The horrid landscape surrounding them was somber, bleak, and silent, but it was proof that an act of unimaginable violence had taken place here once, a long time ago. More than that, the reflection of Soul Stealer could be somewhere close, stalking the twilight haze. He could not allow himself to lose focus. Damnation. Guided by Mordred, the cohort moved from one carcass to another, sometimes walking across the shattered decks of empty ships. There was not a single living soul aboard them. However, the closer they got to twilight, the more well-preserved the corpses of the dead crew members seemed. You noticed it, I guess. Mordred lingered for a moment, glancing at one of the dead warriors. The man looked as if he had only died a few days ago. The Prince of Nothing walked past. This close to the city wall, time is already very slow. It will stop completely beyond it. Just as he said that, they finally saw the walls of twilight. Unlike Weave and Fallen Grace, which were built by connecting a scattering of island ships, Twilight had been built on a single, vast landmass. Or rather, perhaps, landmass was not the right word to describe it. Instead, a carapace of an unfathomably immense nightmare creature served as its foundation. Sonny felt petrified when he realized just how enormous that abomination must have been once. It was far greater than anything he had even seen, incomparable to even the gargantuan black turtle. And yet, it was dead now, its colossal bones supporting a sprawling city. Makes sense. Unlike Twilight, the other settlements on the Great River had not been ruled by a sovereign. Daron had been capable of slaying a colossal horror like this, but not the Sybils. Therefore, their cities had to be composed of individual island ships, while his did not. There was one thing that became painfully obvious when Sonny witnessed Twilight. The bestial serpent king he had fought was a pale shadow of his former self. If they had clashed when Daron was at his peak, Sonny would have been obliterated before even knowing what happened. And yet he lost this battle. Sonny shivered. Were they all mad to think that they had a chance to prevail where a supreme demigod had failed? The walls of Twilight were tall and imposing, built from stone and reinforced with the scales of powerful nightmare creatures. In the dim twilight of the early dawn, they looked like towering black cliffs. However, now, these cliffs were shattered and ruined. Many sections of the wall had collapsed, others had been breached or severely damaged. The corpses of dead abominations piled high, reaching the ramparts in several places. The siege of Twilight had truly been terrible. But what caught Sonny's attention the most was not the devastated state of the city wall, but the eerie nature of the devastation. Time was indeed frozen in Twilight. Shards of broken stone hung in the air, unmoving. Rivers of blood were like abstract sculptures carved from ruby. Dancing flames had turned into motionless, searing blossoms. It was as though some deity had frozen the world in the middle of a fierce battle. We will have to be more careful now. Mordred's voice was strangely somber. His usual amused smile was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the Prince of Nothing seemed full of grim apprehension. Looking at the breached walls of Twilight, he sighed. Soul Stealer is most likely inside the city. We will move stealthily through the back streets and reach the palace. Once we are there, The memory of yours bet her work, sunless. Sunny suppressed the desire to grimace. If even that bastard was nervous, the rest of them had to be ready for anything. Without having to say much, they entered the city through one of the breaches in its wall. Finally, twilight lay in front of them in all its glory. It was entirely unlike the other cities Sunny had seen in the dream realm. There were a few similarities, of course, like the extensive use of materials scavenged from the nightmare creatures in construction, for example. But the architectural style of the Twilight Sea was very unique. It was both robust and airy, paying more attention to practicality than aesthetics, but at the same time expressing the latter in a myriad of subtle ways. Fitting for a culture that had come from a world of water and frequent storms. Sunny did not pay a lot of attention to how the city looked, however, taken by what was happening on its streets. There, countless humans were frozen in the midst of a terrible battle against vile nightmare creatures. Hundreds of thousands, no, millions of them. Some had been frozen in the middle of swinging a sword. Some had been frozen in the middle of being torn apart by the swarming abominations. The gruesome sight of the frozen battle was both strange and disturbing. But what shook Sunny the most was not the eeriness of the motionless slaughter, but the faces of the people of Twilight. Not a single one of them seemed frightened or desperate. Even those who were dying maintained calm expressions, their eyes full of cold resolve. They did not show anger or fury, either only chillingly dark killing intent. Just what kind of army did the Serpent King create? Sure, humans from the Twilight Sea had come to the tomb of Ariel after witnessing the destruction of their world, which had to have changed them. But they were still people. Sunny had spent plenty of time with seasoned soldiers, and none of them were immune to human emotions. Not all of these people were soldiers either. Some were awakened while most were mundane. Some were old while some were young. And yet, he did not see a single person trying to flee or cowering in fear. Strange. Sunny suddenly felt uneasy about their chances of becoming allies with these alien people. However, he did not have time to ponder these matters. Mordred was already walking ahead, carefully maneuvering between the frozen warriors. They entered a narrow street and stealthily advanced toward the center of the city. As they did, Sunny found himself near their guide. He hesitated for a while, then asked quietly, "You've been here for a long time. Don't these people seem a bit strange?" The Prince of Nothing glanced at him with surprise. "How so?" Sunny frowned. "They are too stalwart, I guess." Mordred thought for a few moments and shrugged. "I'm not sure. All people seem a bit strange to me." "Figures." Sunny scoffed internally, but since he was already talking to Mordred, he decided to ask another question. "You must have been really surprised to learn that there's another you walking around, huh?" "I know I was. It's a really weird feeling." The Prince of Nothing raised an eyebrow, then grinned. "Is it weird?" "Ah, it must be, if you say so." Sunny stared at him impassively. What a curious answer. He did not speak after that, preferring to keep quiet. Who knew how good Soul Stealer's hearing was? Eventually, they crossed the outskirts of the city and entered its middle part. The battle seemed much more intense here, as if all participants, both the nightmare creatures and the humans, were rushing toward the heart of Twilight. Strangely enough, there were not that many abominations here. Sure, each of them was immensely powerful, but the defenders of the city still seemed to have an upper hand. The forces of the defilement were being suppressed by them. It made sense. A normal battle would progress in a similar fashion. The invaders would have to fight their way into the city, so their forces would gradually diminish the further away one traveled from the walls. There was just one odd detail. Somehow, it seemed that the epicenter of the battle was not behind them, at the outskirts of the city, but instead ahead of them, near the palace of the Serpent King. Sunny extended his shadow sense outward and frowned. feeling the row of buildings coming to an end not too far away. And indeed, they soon reached a wide open space. Mordred lingered just before entering the square, seemingly tense. Nephi studied the wide square as well, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. Is there another way? The Prince of Nothing slowly shook his head. Not really. The whole city is built like a fortress. The inner districts are separated from the rest, so we won't be able to reach them without exposing ourselves at least a little. Still, as you can see, the skirmish happening on this square is especially fierce. With so many humans and abominations frozen on it, we can at least hide among them. She frowned. Let's go then. They entered the square and walked between the motionless warriors. The battle was indeed especially furious in this area. There were so many people and nightmare creatures here that their bodies formed a bizarre labyrinth. Sometimes, Sunny found it hard to squeeze between their frozen figures. Crouching, he crawled beneath a sword that was being plunged into the neck of a repulsive abomination. Standing up, he had to twist his body to avoid touching a frozen fountain of ruby blood. Then, he came face to face with a warrior whose arm was being severed by the fangs of a towering nightmare creature. Sunny shivered. The humans and the abominations were not statues or lifelike mannequins. They were entirely real. He could see every hair, every bead of sweat, every drop of blood on the fangs of the frenzied monsters that surrounded him. All of them were simply frozen in time, and although Sunny knew that it could not happen, he found it hard not to feel as if these warriors would start moving any moment now. The swords would come down, the frozen blood would flow, and the hungry maws would snap shut, turning the silent square into an inescapable hell of bloodshed and violence. Just keep moving. He forced himself to ignore the ominous feeling and advanced forward, step by step. Very soon, however, Sunny collided with Mordred's back. The Prince of Nothing had chosen that moment to stop walking for some reason. What's the matter? Annoyed, Sunny looked up and froze, noticing how grim Mordred was. His mirror-like eyes were reflecting the frozen world, full of blood and darkness. A moment later, the Prince of Nothing looked back at them and smiled. Then he said in a perfectly calm tone, "Stay absolutely still." Of them froze, fading into the chaotic scene of the motionless battlefield. Surrounded by unmoving warriors and nightmare creatures, the six masters were nearly indistinguishable from them. Sunny and Mordred were next to each other, while Nephi's was a few steps away. Effie and Jet were right behind her, separated from the rest of the group by a few meters. They held their breaths. Soul Stealer is near. Sunny did not see or sense the defiled saint, but there was no other reason for Mordred to warn them. The Prince of Nothing looked too tense. A pleasant smile was playing on his lips, but his eyes were full of cold darkness. Sunny saw his own pale reflection in them, and then he saw something else there as well. A cold shiver ran down his spine. Did something move at the edge of the square? He did not dare to speak aloud, but there was the blessing of dusk. Activating the enchantment of the Shroud of Graceless Dusk, he established a mental connection between himself and Mordred. What is happening? The Prince of Nothing remained as motionless as a statue. Even his eyes continued to stare at the same spot. However, his answer arrived shortly. Why, what else? Soul Stealer is here. He must have sensed us. Sunny suppressed a strong desire to grit his teeth and calmed his heart. Making sure that it wasn't beating too loudly, he asked, "How, didn't you say that you would hide our presence from him?" A hint of dark amusement appeared in Mordred's eyes. "Did I? No, not quite. I only said that I would try to hide it, remember, which I did." He paused for a moment and added in a dejected tone, "Soul Stealer's mirror realm encompasses the entire city. Therefore, he can perceive everything that happens here all at once. I've been manipulating countless reflections to mask our presence, every puddle of water, every shard of glass, every polished sword, every pair of eyes. Forgive me for making it sound like an easy task, but it's not. Regardless, we've only come this far because of me, but now it seems that our luck has run out. Sonny forced himself to remain calm. It was a bit hard, considering that an even more sinister, more evil version of the Prince of Nothing could have been following their scent. So what now? Mordred shifted his gaze slightly. Now, well, might I suggest praying? Perhaps that monster won't notice us. After that, he fell silent. Damn it! With no other choice, Sonny continued to stand in place, pretending to be one of the frozen warriors. They had discussed the possibility of something like this happening, of course, but only as the worst-case scenario. To think that their plan would be at the risk of being derailed before the battle even began, this step had been supposed to be the easiest one. The true hardship would arrive when the array was deactivated, and the battle against the defiled legion resumed. A few moments passed in absolute silence. And then Sonny felt it, the ground beneath his feet shaking subtly, as if something terribly heavy was approaching them with measured steps. He could not turn around and take a look, but Mordred's eyes were like two mirrors. The bloody scene of the frozen battlefield reflected in them, and so Sonny caught a glimpse of the creature that emerged from between the houses, entering the square. His blood turned cold in his veins. Soul Stealer, or rather the reflection of Soul Stealer, looked unlike anything he had imagined. Undying slaughter and devouring beast had been changed and twisted by the defilement. However, they still resembled their former selves. Soul Stealer did not. In fact, he did not resemble anything Sonny had ever seen. The vague figure that entered the square did not look like a human, but it did not look like an abomination either. Instead, it was like an amalgamation of countless people and numerous nightmare creatures, all fused together into a harrowing patchwork monster. The contours of its body constantly changed, as if light refracted when touching it. Or maybe they were indeed changing, shifting from one shape to another. With each of its steps, the ground shook. Gods, what the hell is that thing? Sonny was appalled and more than a little bit rattled, not only because of how eerie and alien the reflection of the creature looked, but also because there were 7 nodes of vile darkness permeating its monstrous body. Soul Stealer was a corrupted titan. Sonny shifted his gaze and stared at Mordred for a moment. It was the source of this horror, standing next to him with a pleasant smile on his lips, using that smile to cover the eerie, unnerving wrongness hiding behind it. Should we really be helping this bastard transcend? He hesitated for a moment, then threw these thoughts out of his head. Here in the nightmare, it was good to have Mordred on their side. It was infinitely better, at least, than having him as their enemy. What kind of a weird transformation ability is this? What is he capable of in this form? The Prince of Nothing lingered with an answer. It's not a transformation ability per se. It's simply the shape of his soul. His physical body looks different, hidden somewhere in twilight. I've never been able to find it. He paused for a moment. Becoming defiled did a real number on me, didn't it? Bah, so unsightly. With that, Mordred's eyes shook a little. That's not what we should be concerned with, though. The real problem is that the monster is moving straight for us. By then, the quaking of the ground had grown more pronounced. Sonny cursed inwardly, but still remained motionless. Surrounded by frozen warriors and abominations, with his back turned to the approaching titan, needless to say, every cell in his body was screaming of danger, pushing him to move. So what do we do? Mordred remained silent for a few moments, then suddenly turned his head and looked directly at Sonny. There was no humor left in his cold, mirror-like eyes. I guess it's time for desperate measures. How unfortunate. It's up to you now, Sunless. As soon as Mordred moved, there was a chilling sound from behind them, and something swift tore through the air in their direction. A massive, terrifyingly deep shadow fell on Sunny, making him feel as if he was drowning in it. Damn it! He was already turning, instinctively trying to summon the sin of solace. However, all Sunny saw was the fabric of reality around them cracking like glass, and then shattering to reveal. He was violently thrown out of the mirror realm, crashing on the cobblestones of twilight, the real twilight, not its perfect reflection. Damn it all! The only contingency they had in case Soul Stealer discovered them was to escape the world of reflections altogether. Mordred had managed to send them back at the very last moment, so they were safe for now. But the problem was that everyone, including the Prince of Nothing himself, was now frozen in time. Everyone except for Sunny, who was protected from the influence of the defensive array by the crown of twilight. Standing up, he uttered a quiet curse and looked up, at the distant dome of the Serpent King's palace. Now he alone could reach it. The crown of twilight was more than a supreme memory. It was also the symbol of power that Daron, the Serpent King, had wielded, as well as the key to the enchantment array enveloping his city. Therefore, the person wearing it was immune to the influence of frozen time, in a way. Curse it all! There was a cost to remaining unaffected by the frozen time. Looking around, Sunny felt his essence being devoured at a frightening rate. The crown was using it to protect him. Usually, his reserves would have been drained in a matter of seconds, turning him into another prisoner of twilight. But luckily, the crown was also helping him replenish the spent essence. He was still losing more than he was gaining, but at least the rate of attrition was not too great. Sunny would not have been able to traverse the entire city, but now that he was most of the way to the palace, he stood a good chance. As long as he did not waste any time. I should hurry. Their exit from Soul Stealer's mirror realm must have been a violent one, because Sunny was not on the square anymore. Instead, he found himself somehow thrown a few hundred meters away from his previous position, at the edge of the inner district they had been aiming for. He was protected by the crown, but his shadows were not. Therefore, Sunny had kept them tightly wrapped around his body in advance, just in case disaster struck. Now that it had, he did not dare send them to search for his companions. Mordred had to have sent everyone into the real twilight. Here in the true version of the Lost City, Soul Stealer was just as powerless as the rest of the frozen abominations, but the rest of the cohort had become frozen in time as well. So had the Prince of Nothing himself. It was all up to Sunny. We'll find each other when I deactivate the array. Turning his back to the frozen battlefield, Sunny dashed forward. He ran as fast as he could, barely dodging the motionless figures of the warriors of twilight, who all seemed to have been moving in the same direction as him. Here in the inner districts, there were very few rampaging nightmare creatures. However, the signs of destruction were everywhere, as if the city had withstood a devastating bombardment. Many buildings had been entirely shattered, and numerous people had perished under the rubble. Blood was flowing like a river, frozen in time like the rest of twilight. Sunny was an ascended terror, and so, his running speed was far past being superhuman. He navigated the frozen city as best he could, but it was hard to maintain that speed on the crowded streets. On more than one occasion, he failed to react in time and collided with the frozen warriors of twilight or pieces of shattered stone hanging in the air. Each time he was tossed back, as if hitting an indestructible wall. The people and objects frozen in time were completely immune to outside influence, and so he could only avoid them. Arg, damn it! Finally, he was forced to slow down. This close to the palace, there were too many people for him to run, and too many destroyed buildings to try moving across the rooftops. Using Shadow Step was only going to rob him of precious essence, so he had to continue on foot. After struggling for several minutes, Sunny finally pushed his way through the crowd of frozen warriors and entered the heart of twilight. In front of him, separated from the buildings by a vast, ravaged park, stood the Serpent King's palace. However, Sonny did not pay any attention to its magnificent grandeur and unique architecture. Raising his gaze, he looked at the grandiose dome of the palace and shuddered. What the hell? A harrowing, beautiful creature was perched on top of the cracked dome, its talons piercing the crumbling stone. Its glistening scales were the color of the midnight sky, appearing entirely black in the dim twilight of the early dawn. Its vast wings were open, obscuring the heavens. Its sinister eyes burned like distant, cold stars, full of malevolent will and merciless fury. It was a dragon. The dragon's terrifying maw was wide open, frozen in the middle of a deafening roar. Porcelain fangs glistened in the dismal darkness, each resembling a sharp mountain peak. The tyrant of the night sky was beautiful, no, it should have been, but instead it somehow appeared dreadful and utterly hideous. A vile, tyrannical aura emanated from the giant creature, suffused with festering madness. Even unmoving, it instilled Sonny with cold terror. That dragon was the target of the countless warriors who were rushing toward the palace. They assaulted him like a sea, only to be broken, mutilated, and thrown back. Blood and mangled bodies were falling down like rain, frozen in the air by the halted time. Sonny allowed himself to remain still for a moment, enthralled by the eeriness of this harrowing scene. The Dread Lord. So the Dread Lord had attacked the heart of the city directly. Daron's palace was already partially destroyed, its dome on the verge of collapsing. It was unclear if the throne room even existed anymore. Sonny gritted his teeth and rushed forward. There is something eerie about this scene. The hideous dragon made for an ominous and startling sight, but the warriors of Twilight were equally haunting. The way they threw themselves into the maws of death without a hint of doubt or agitation made Sonny feel uneasy. There were mundane humans among them, as well. Surely, they realized that nothing they could do would harm the defiled saint. Did they really know no fear? Throwing the unnecessary thoughts out of his head, Sonny climbed over the rubble and entered the palace. He did not have a lot of essence left, so there was little time to find the throne room. Once there, he would also have to figure out a way to use the Crown of Twilight and deactivate the defensive array. Sadly, it did not come with an instruction manual. Damn it all. Sonny followed the widest of the corridors, hoping that they would lead him to the throne room. Daron had been a sovereign and brought a cohort of saints with him into the tomb of Ariel. Surely, he would have built his palace to accommodate their transformation abilities. Most of the areas within the palace were only meant for humans, but the truly important places had to be large enough for saints. Otherwise, if an enemy suddenly attacked, they would not be able to show their strength. The throne room would, without a doubt, be one of these important places. At least Sonny hoped so, knowing that he did not have enough time left to scour the entire palace. Soon, a huge gate appeared in front of him, now broken and turned into a pile of debris. Behind it was an enormous hall. Stark rays of light fell through the cracks in the dome above it, plunging it into twilight. At the center of the hall was a tall dais, with an imposing throne on top of it. The throne was cut roughly from stone. More precisely, it was cut from a single slab of lusterless black stone. Sonny stared at it for a brief moment. Found it. Daron's throne, all of it, had been cut from a fragment of the estuary. It was the lock of the defensive array of Twilight, while his crown was its key. Sonny stared at the black throne. The grand hall of the Serpent King's palace was empty and dim, stone debris littering the floor and hanging in the air, dust particles frozen in the stark rays of light. Despite the cataclysmic battle happening outside, it was perfectly silent, except for the hoarse sounds of his breathing. Right, let's do this. He felt a complicated mix of relief, anticipation, and dread. Relief and anticipation because he had made it in time, dread because the battle against the horde of the defilement would resume the moment he accomplished his task. The monstrous soul stealer, the harrowing dread lord, they were going to have to fight these beings. Sonny still remembered the terror of facing a corrupted titan in battle. The winter beast alone had been enough to wipe out the remains of the first evacuation army and the millions of refugees in Falcon Scott. The deathly frost of that dark day had seeped into his bones. But today was going to be different. All the members of the cohort were here. Mordred was here, too, and a vast army of warriors from a distant realm, all seasoned veterans of the nightmare spell. Sonny had grown much stronger as well. "We'll kill them both." Shaking off the momentary hesitation, he walked toward the black throne. As he did, Sonny noticed something behind the dais. The throne room was not entirely empty. After all, someone was standing there, frozen in the middle of looking up at the crumbling dome. A tall and elegant figure wearing ivory armor, which was tied at the waist with a burnt umber sash. Auburn hair, green eyes. Sonny froze for a moment. Kai. So this was where the spell had sent his friend. Kai had been in the throne room all along, frozen in time and not even aware of what was happening around him. All the long months that had passed were like a moment to him. Sonny did not even know whether to feel jealous or sad for his friend. Looking away, he put his foot on the first step of the dais. "Hang in there, buddy. I'll release you really soon." His essence was getting dangerously low. Climbing on the dais, Sonny stopped in front of the black throne, unsure what to do. The first idea that came to his mind was to sit on it, like Daron must have done when he held court in the past. But somehow, Sonny did not like that idea. He never aspired to be a king of anything, let alone of a city whose former king he had killed. Magnificent thrones were not really his thing. He was already plenty happy with his handy shadow chair. Whatever. Feeling a sense of urgency, Sonny took a step closer and suddenly noticed a circular groove carved into the back of the throne. Its size and depth seemed just about right. Cassie had destroyed the time enchantment of Alethia's island by inserting the key into a slot carved into the estuary fragment. Following an impulse, Sonny took off the crown of twilight and brought it to the circular groove. As soon as he did, an invisible force pulled the band of dark metal out of his hand. The crown fitted the groove perfectly, merging with the black stone of the throne. Luckily, its connection to his soul had not been cut. Sonny could still make use of its enchantments. He also felt a different, much vaster connection being established between his soul and something immense. The city itself, perhaps. Taking a deep breath, Sonny looked up at the cracked dome of the palace and pulled on that connection, giving a mental command. "In the name of Daron, the Serpent King, in the name of Wind Flower of the Twilight Sea, and all those who have fallen, lost from light, order time to flow once more." For a few moments, nothing happened. The grand hall of the palace was just as still and silent as before. But then a loud sound tore the silence apart. It was the sound of a shard of stone falling on the floor. Sonny turned swiftly and saw pieces of debris scattering across the marble tiles. His eyes widened when he realized the significance of what just happened. Then it was as though an invisible ripple spread through the world. The dust that had been hanging in the air, motionless, moved and danced in the rays of light. The shard of stone raining from the cracked dome of the palace plummeted down one after another, breaking against the marble floor. A muffled murmur of the disastrous battle seeped through the stone walls of the palace, sounding like the rising sea. I actually did it." And then something struck the dome with a deafening noise, making the whole palace shake. Sonny felt claws of fear grasp his heart. Yes, he had indeed done it, and now it was time to face the consequences of what he had done. There was an evil dragon right above his head right now, hellbent on slaughtering every human in Twilight. There were also the members of the cohort lost somewhere on the streets of the city, a dreadful mirror titan, and an army of eerie warriors whose loyalty had to be won somehow. But first, tearing the crown of Twilight from the groove cut into the black throne, Sunny put it on his head and hurriedly dashed toward the lone figure standing beneath the dais. Kai was just now starting to move. He swayed a little and took a step back, stumbling over the first step of the dais. Before he could fall, however, Sunny caught him and started dragging him away from the throne. The charming archer looked very confused. Sunny, what is happening? Are we in the nightmare?" Feeling the palace quake once again around them, Sunny cursed inwardly. "Hey Kai, short version. Yes, we are in the nightmare. There is an evil version of you who is an abominable dragon trying to eat us right now. Don't worry though. There is also an army of alien warriors from a destroyed world to help us kill you, the dragon. The rest of the cohort is also here somewhere. We got separated when a corrupted titan attacked us in the mirror version of this city, which was frozen in time. But now, I thought it, I guess." Sunny glanced at Kai and smiled. "Oh, and also, Effie is pregnant." The archer stared at him with wide eyes for a few moments. "I know." Sunny almost stumbled. "What? You know about the plagues, the Twilight Sea, and the defensive array?" Kai shook his head and outstretched one arm, summoning his bow. "No, I know about Effie. She confided in me weeks ago. I have no idea what the rest of the things you said mean." Sunny stared at him incredulously, feeling hurt for some reason. "So she told Kai, but she didn't tell me. HMPH. He couldn't help but say vindictively. "Actually, I knew months ago." Which was still later than Kai, but technically true. Kai gave him a strange glance, then opened his mouth to say something. But at that moment, Sunny froze. Something was very strange about the palace. It took him a moment to realize what had changed. Why is everything so quiet? The muffled sounds of the furious battle raging outside had disappeared at some point, plunging the world into eerie silence. Sunny felt his hair stand on end. He had a dreadful premonition that they had made a terrible mistake somewhere. "Sunny, what is it?" Kai must have read something from his expression, but Sunny did not know how to answer. He was suddenly in a state of mild panic, feeling like there had been a mistake in their plan. They must have misunderstood the situation somehow. But what was there to misunderstand? Twilight was besieged by the forces of the defilement. In the middle of the battle, the Mad Prince had activated the defensive array, trapping Soul Stealer and the Dread Lord in frozen time, and therefore escaping from the clutches of his master. The madman had also manipulated the events of this cycle to make sure that Sunny arrived at Twilight wearing the Serpent King's crown. He must have wanted the battle to resume, so that his future self, free of being enslaved to the Dread Lord, could turn its tide and destroy the Tyrant of Verge. "Right. I don't know, something is wrong." Sunny gritted his teeth and pulled Kai to follow him, aiming to leave the throne room as soon as possible. They had to traverse the battlefield and find the other members of the cohort first. Together, they would stand a much better chance of surviving the clash with the defiled legion. But before he could take another step, the palace shuddered, throwing both of them to the ground. There was a deafening rumble behind them, and the great hall was suddenly much brighter than it had been before. A whole section of the dome shattered and collapsed, revealing the beautiful twilight sky above, and the giant head of the harrowing dragon that had broken it. Enormous chunks of stone fell down, burying the black throne beneath debris. Luckily, Sunny and Kai had already distanced themselves from the dais, otherwise they would have been buried with it. Damnation! The Dread Lord's head passed through the breach, hovering in the air on his long neck. His eyes shone with starlight, full of sinister madness and malevolence. Then, The harrowing dragon pushed his enormous body inside, causing more of the dome to collapse. A moment later, he landed in the throne room with a loud thud, and the palace shook once more. Strangely enough, though, it did not look as if the dread lord was chasing them. Instead, it almost looked as if he was escaping something. Towering above Sunny and Kai, the dragon gazed at them and opened its maw, his porcelain fangs glistening in the dim twilight. Sunny cursed inwardly and called upon his shadows, at the same time summoning the sin of solace. However, before he could, a thunderous voice suddenly resounded in his mind, causing him enormous pain. "Stop!" And following the dread lord's command, Sunny halted, frozen in place. It was as if the dragon's words were the law and he was unable to disobey. What but the shadow bond? By his side, Kai was frozen still, as well. It was only then that Sunny realized that the dread lord had not used the shadow bond against him. It was simply the authority of his voice. It was Kai's ascended ability, amplified and made more terrible by the dragon's corrupted rank. Kai's power had always been more than a little bit sinister. The charming archer was a good and honest person by nature, so he only ever used it to inspire his allies and influence nightmare creatures. However, in the hands of someone less decent, it had the potential to produce truly terrifying results. Being able to make anyone do anything, at least those of lesser ranks than you, was very much like wielding absolute power over them. And power, as everyone knew, corrupted. Sunny had always known that his friend's aspect had a scary side to it. That was why he was not too surprised to learn that it was the gentle and caring Kai who had become the dreadful Lord of Verge with Kai's upright character, destroyed by the curse of the defilement. The insidious side of his aspect would have had nothing to keep it in check anymore. However, knowing and experiencing it himself were two different things. "Curse it!" Paralyzed by the dreadful command, Sunny kneeled in front of the towering dragon. Somewhere else on the devastated streets of Twilight, Nephi's was released from the inescapable trap of frozen time. Disoriented, she fell and rolled, jumping to her feet a moment later. All around her, the time shackles binding the warriors of Twilight were slowly coming undone. Their cold eyes were regaining the spark of life. Their chests were beginning to rise and fall as they breathed for the first time in countless years. Their weapons glistened as they reflected the light of dawn. Sunny was gone. Considering that the defensive array had been deactivated, he must have reached the palace already. Mordred of Valor was nowhere to be seen. He had returned to his physical body, which was lost somewhere in Twilight. Cassie, Effie, and Soul Reaper Jet had to be somewhere nearby, but she couldn't see them. We can still win this battle." Although the cohort had been separated when escaping Soul Stealer's mirror realm, their primary goal was achieved. Time had been unfrozen, and the warriors of Twilight were released. Now they just had to regroup, join forces with the defenders of the city, and overcome the invading legion of abominations. The battle would not be easy, it would be cruel and harrowing, maybe even lethal. But when had it ever been different? Nephi's took a step forward and hesitated for a moment, looking at the warriors around her. Suddenly she had an ominous premonition. Something felt wrong about the scene. "I need to convince them." She was a stranger to these people. They did not know that countless years had passed since the start of the battle, that their king was dead, and that their world had long been destroyed. That challengers from an alien realm had entered the nightmare, hoping to prevail where their predecessors failed. But still, the spell had a way of simplifying things. In its terrible world there were humans, and there were nightmare creatures. Nephi's might have been from a different world, but she was also a human, therefore. She was a natural ally simply by virtue of not being a nightmare creature. Looking at the defenders of the city, Nephi's pushed down the familiar, debilitating discomfort of talking to strangers and said, her voice bright and clear. "Warriors of Twilight, I am." And then something odd happened, forcing her to fall silent and grip the hilt of her sword. Countless people crowding the street all turned to look at her. They did so with perfect synchronicity, their hollow eyes devoid of any emotion. Their eerie faces were calm and motionless. None of them said anything, simply staring at her in ominous silence. Seeing herself reflecting in thousands of emotionless eyes, Nephi's realized that something was terribly, terribly wrong. She might have been a human, but these people were not anymore. A harrowing realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. They are. They were Soul Stealer. All of them. Nephi's finally realized her mistake, but by then it was already too late to change anything. The frozen battle they had witnessed was not a battle between the defiled legion of Verge and the defenders of Twilight. Instead, it was a battle between the Dread Lord and Soul Stealer. The two defiled saints must have clashed as soon as the last true bastion of humanity in the tomb of Ariel had fallen. Perhaps it was because they had needed each other's power before that. Perhaps it was because Soul Stealer had finally become capable of resisting the authority of the Dread Lord after devouring the souls and stealing the bodies of millions of humans in Twilight. Can it be his transformation ability? To split his soul into countless shards, all beholden to one sinister will. That would be a terrifying power in the hands of someone as devious as the Forsaken Prince of War. He had already been insidiously dangerous due to his ability to slither into human souls and wear their bodies like costumes. What if Mordred of Valor could possess not one, but several stolen bodies at the same time? Or millions of them, after becoming the Soul Stealer. Surrounded from all sides, with countless hollow eyes looking at her with an eerie lack of human emotions, Nephi's took an involuntary step back. However, there were countless taken warriors standing behind her as well. There was nowhere to retreat, no path to salvation. Except for the impossible one she could try and cut for herself. She gritted her teeth. At least Sunny is not here. As numerous humans moved toward her, Nephi's looked at them with cold resentment and unsheathed her sword. Not too far away, Effie, Jet, and Cassie found themselves inside a half-collapsed building. The blind girl was the first one to regain her senses, catching the tall huntress before she could fall. Pieces of rubble rolled on the cracked floor, the noise of their fall sounding thunderous in the eerie silence of the frozen city. Although by then, the city was not frozen anymore. Out there all around them, twilight was beginning to stir. Jet summoned her scythe, looking over the collapsed wall of the building. Beyond the rubble on a narrow street, the figures of the stalwart defenders of Twilight were slowly coming back to life. There were no nightmare creatures nearby, only people. But her expression was troubled for some reason. "They're moving." Effie regained her balance and followed Soul Reaper's gaze. A small smile appeared on her lips. Doofus must have reached the throne room then. She looked at the human figures outside. "Those guys seem a bit weird though, huh? I guess it's only natural for people from a different world. Well, at least they're tough. Soft people don't survive the spell." Her voice gradually faded away, replaced by a tense silence for a moment. "Why are they staring at us like that?" Before Effie could finish the sentence, a delicate hand appeared in front of her eyes, covering them. Cassie was standing on tiptoes, preventing her from looking at the warriors of Twilight. Jet was slowly backing away. Before the huntress could react, Cassie spoke in a grave and urgent tone. "Effie, take Soul Reaper and yourself into the locket, now." Effie hesitated for a moment but did not ask any questions. A moment later, her figure disappeared. So did Jet's. They were gone, safely transported to the idyllic meadow. All that remained was an iron locket on a black cord, which fell to the ground. Before it touched the cracked floor, however, The cord was caught on the blade of a slender rapier. Raising the quiet dancer, Cassie caught the locket and cautiously put it around her neck. Then, she turned to face the approaching figures. Behind the silver half-mask, her beautiful blue eyes were cold and somber. The tip of her rapier shook slightly, then moved, pointing at the emotionless humans. Somewhere else, Mordred fell to the ground and gasped when his bloody stump hit the rubble. A pained groan escaped from his lips, then a stifled chuckle. Looking up, he observed the ruined street. All around him, humans and nightmare creatures were being slowly released from the shackles of frozen time. Their weapons moved, their maws opened hungrily. Blood flowed onto the cold stones once more. Mordred remained motionless for a moment, looking upon the world through countless reflections. Then his eyes widened slightly. So that's how it is. An amused smile twisted his cracked lips. Leaning on his sword, Mordred struggled to stand up and grinned when he felt countless eyes, and yet only a single gaze landing on him. Ah, how unfortunate. All his reflections had been destroyed. He only had a single soul core left, reducing his power to that of a mere beast. His own ascended body was missing a hand, while his best spare was nothing more than an awakened squire with a modestly useless aspect. Truly, the circumstances couldn't have been worse. Well, at least things wouldn't be boring. He had spent so many months, or was it years already, hiding from his defiled self in complete solitude. Any kind of excitement was better than that dull existence, no matter how fatal it would turn out to be. Such wonderful odds, I feel refreshed. Smiling, he raised his sword and pointed it at the nearest warrior. Then his smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of cold contempt. His mirror-like eyes calmly reflected countless approaching figures, full of dark killing intent. I haven't had the pleasure of putting down repugnant things like you in a long, long time. Come, if you dare, let's see which one of us will be the last one standing. Mordred took a step forward as well. Back in the Serpent King's palace, Sunny was kneeling on the marble floor, paralyzed by the dragon's command. The dread lord towered above him and Kai, full of sinister malevolence. Looking at the terrifying porcelain fangs of the defiled saint, Sunny felt a dark sense of foreboding. Cursed! Where were the warriors of Twilight? Why had they not stalled the damned herald of the estuary at all? The battle had not even properly started, and he was already in such a desperate situation. Sunny could almost feel the shadow of death pulling him into its cold embrace. He looked at the dread lord bitterly. At least Nephi's is not here. Sunny was in a desperate situation, but not a hopeless situation yet. There were still things he could do to try and get himself and Kai out of this predicament alive. He just had to gamble with their lives and hope for the best. Before he could, though, a human figure suddenly appeared at the edge of the broken dome of the palace, and then another and another. The warriors of Twilight had finally caught up with the dread lord. Sunny could not even turn his head to take a better look at the humans that had appeared above the ruined throne room, standing on the edge of the collapsed sections of the dome. At least he knew now that the army of Twilight was not gone. It was still out there, beyond the walls of the palace, fighting against the invading abominations. Fighting against the dread lord and soul stealer. Thank the dead gods. He had no hope that these few warriors would be able to defeat the dreadful dragon. If they had the ability, there would have been no need to plunge Twilight into the eternal trap of frozen time, to begin with. But they could at least distract the dread lord for a few moments, which would give him an opportunity to somehow rid himself of the command. Perhaps. Once Sunny was free and reunited with the other members of the cohort, they would join the defenders of the city and help them slay the defiled saints. He was already planning his next actions when something strange happened. The people who had climbed the dome of the palace jumped down into the throne room without hesitation. which wasn't that strange in and of itself, except for the fact that not all of them were equally powerful. The few masters among them landed easily, ready to attack the next moment. The awakened warriors were less graceful, crashing heavily on the marble floor. Most frightening of all was that there were mundane humans among them as well. The height of the dome was too great for them to survive the fall. They hit the floor with repulsive sounds, painting it with their blood, dying senselessly. What are they doing? Witnessing the dreadful scene, Sonny felt horrified. Dozens of people were emotionlessly jumping to their deaths, not even hesitating before taking the fatal plunge. It was so appalling, so meaningless, so inhuman. His eyes widened as a terrible suspicion surfaced in his mind. As those of the warriors who were strong enough to survive the jump dashed forward to attack their enemy, the harrowing dragon simply swiped his tail, pulverizing their bodies into puddles of blood. A crimson haze spread through the dim twilight of the great hall. Sonny was suddenly nauseated. Soul Stealer, those people were taken by Soul Stealer. The strangeness that he had felt from the moment the cohort entered Twilight, the eerily emotionless faces of the defenders of the city, their cold, empty eyes. The morbid revelations that Nephi's had experienced moments before flooded Sonny's mind, forcing him to shudder, or at least try to. The Dread Lord's command held his body firmly in place. Impossible, impossible. There were millions of people in Twilight. How could Soul Stealer have possessed them all? What kind of monster could do that? What kind of conscience could control millions of puppets, reflecting false copies of their souls? He reeled, remembering the ghastly being they had seen in the mirror version of Twilight. That being, the reflection of Soul Stealer's own twisted soul, had looked like a repulsive amalgamation of countless humans and nightmare creatures, all joined together into an abominable patchwork monster. A demented, fractured monster like that probably could. Sonny felt utter despair, but also a strong desire to curse. That goddamn Mordred, even when he's on our side, he's still such a disaster. How could a person be such a bad omen? Whenever the Prince of Nothing appeared, something utterly terrible was bound to happen. Calm down. There was no point in seething with anger at Mordred. There was no point in wondering how Soul Stealer could have devoured all of Twilight, or why he and the Dread Lord were fighting each other. None of that would help Sonny survive the current situation. It was also not going to help him salvage that situation. But could it even be salvaged? Weren't all of them already doomed? The plan had been based on completely wrong information from the very start. No, we can still win somehow. There had to be a way. Sonny felt sick to his stomach and frightened for Nephi's and the rest of his companions, who were lost somewhere out there, on the streets of Twilight, surrounded by the numerous bodies of Soul Stealer. Especially Effie, who was much more vulnerable to the insidious powers of the Mirror Wraith than the rest of them. But he could not do anything about that, at least not now. In fact, Sonny had his own dire problem to deal with. The Dread Lord might not have been as utterly horrific as Soul Stealer, but he was still a foe far more dreadful than words could describe. And dealing with him was now up to Sonny. No matter what else happened, the Tyrant of Verge had to die. I have to kill that fiend. I have to kill him somehow. The Dread Lord had already dealt with the Soul Stealer puppets that had pursued him into the throne room, but more were pouring over the edge of the broken dome like morbid rain. The two plagues were fighting each other, which was good for the cohort. But their clash did not mean that Sonny and his companions would not be destroyed in the process. In fact, now that they were here in Twilight, they had become alluring tools for the defiled saints. The Dread Lord was, without a doubt, capable of using his authority to turn them into deadly weapons against Soul Stealer. Soul Stealer, meanwhile, could empower himself even further by taking their bodies. Damn it all. The Dread Lord's authority. It was a manifestation of Kai's ascended ability. And Kai's ascended ability was a mental attack of sorts. Sunny already possessed a very high resistance to mental attacks, but that resistance was relative. It was enough, for example, to shrug off an order given to him by Kai, a fellow master. But in front of a defiled saint, and one as immensely powerful as the Dread Lord, it had proved to be insufficient. A complete immunity to mental attacks, however, was much less relative. In fact, it was closer to being absolute. As fate would have it, Sunny possessed a memory that could grant them just that, albeit at a cost. Unable to move, he used the Shroud of Dusk to send Kai a mental message. Kai listened to me carefully. His friend did not move. He was unable to, but his response arrived shortly. I'm listening. Sunny took a deep breath. When I start moving, think of me as an enemy. Don't get close. It will be dangerous. With that, he sent his essence into the crown of twilight. King's resentment, enchantment description. This memory grants the wearer complete immunity to mind attacks, but plagues them with irresistible wrath instead. The next moment, Sunny felt the invisible shackles holding him in place shattering. And at the same time, he felt a fury so vast that it couldn't be described with words shattering his mind. His thoughts were incinerated by the terrible, mad, boundless ire. He lost awareness of who he was, what he had to do, what he hoped to achieve. All he knew was that he had to destroy, kill, hurt, annihilate everything. Everyone. All of them. I'm lost from light. Some small vestige of his sanity remembered to utter his true name, hoping that it would anchor his crumbling mind. But it didn't work. All it did was remind him of the tools he had at his disposal to visit utter devastation upon the world. A low, bestial growl escaped from his mouth. And then, a wicked smile appeared on his lips. The crown of twilight had another gift to give him. A nearly endless amount of essence. Now that the defensive array was deactivated, nothing was draining his reserves anymore. It was all at his disposal. Jumping forward, Sunny called upon the shadows, surrounding himself in a sea of them. Then, a giant serpent with black scales, clad in a fearsome onyx armor, emerged from the sea of shadows, murderous wrath burning in his mad eyes. Slithering across the ruined floor of Daron's palace with stunning speed, the monstrous serpent created in his image lunged at the towering dragon and coiled himself around the winged horror's mighty body. Without wasting a single moment, Sunny opened his terrifying maw and tried to sink his fangs into the Dread Lord's neck. Nephi saw the Serpent King's palace sway from afar. Its dome was collapsing, and a net of cracks appeared on its walls. However, she had no time to pay attention to what was happening in the distance. The street she had found herself on was crowded with countless warriors, and all of them were moving toward her, an eerie emptiness hiding behind their ruthless eyes. Hundreds of them, thousands even, and that was only on this one street. Enemies were in front of her, behind her, and on all sides. There seemed to be no escape from this human flood. Their hands were already reaching toward her, aiming to catch her and push her down. Surrounded by the undulating mob, Nephi struggled not to surrender to primal fear. Before the first hand touched her chainmail shirt, she took a stance and lashed out with her sword. The movement was ingrained into her very bones, absorbed by both her body and mind. Mass, speed, force, space, and time. Levers and fulcrums, transfer of energy. That was what swordplay was, deconstructed to its most basic pillars. Her body was a versatile and intricate tool for expressing these principles. Of course, there was another element to it, one that existed outside the scope of fundamental physics: thought. After all, the most perfect tool would be useless without a conscious will to guide it, and thoughts, both her own and those of her enemies, could become a tool in turn. But that was much harder to master. The severed hand fell to the ground, bright blood spilling on the cobblestones. A normal human would have recoiled in terror, or at least showed a reaction. Even a nightmare creature would not have completely ignored the loss of a limb. However, the empty shell hosting the perverse consciousness of Soul Stealer did not pay it any attention, continuing its lunge at Nephi's. She had calculated that the warrior would not be deterred as well. Shifting her weight, Nephi's turned her torso and allowed the warrior to brush past her. At the same time, she gave him a measured shove. The man was already losing his balance, so that was enough to send him stumbling into the wall of people to her left. Her sword had never stopped moving. After severing the arm of the nearest human, she pierced the neck of another, then slammed the guard of the sword into the third, all in one fluid motion. By then, the hand she had used to shove the first warrior was already landing back on the hilt, giving her more leverage, and therefore speed. And therefore freedom. Nephi's exploded into motion, shredding the bodies of the closest attackers like a hurricane of steel. A bright radiance suffused her skin, making it seem as though a merciless spirit of light was moving through the crowd of mortal warriors. One after another, their bodies seemed to melt in that light, severed and cut apart. The white radiance was soon tinted red, shining through the bloody haze. Faster. Her mind was silent and clear, moving at incredible speed. She perceived a million details about her environment, seamlessly assimilated these observations into a comprehensive understanding, and instantly formulated flawless responses to the shifting landscape of the battlefield. The silver longsword cut down anyone who entered within its reach, knowing no mercy or hesitation. Crimson blood was boiling and evaporating from its incandescent blade. Nephi's was alone, surrounded by thousands of enemies. However, that was all right. Many of these people were awakened, but most were mundane. They were much slower than her, much weaker than her, much more fragile than her. More than that, numerical advantage had a limit to how much it could help them. After a certain point, it did not matter. The bodies of these warriors all took up a certain amount of space. Only so many enemies could attack her at the same time, obstructed from approaching her by the walls of the surrounding buildings and the bodies of their own comrades. So, it wasn't like Nephi's had to fight with thousands of Soul Stealer's marionettes at the same time. She only had to fight against a dozen or so at once, and those she could kill. But what did it matter? She could kill a dozen. She could kill 100, 1,000, 10,000 maybe, but she couldn't kill millions of them. Sooner or later, she would grow tired. Her essence would run dry. Soul Stealer would send the more powerful awakened and swarms of masters to confront her. Warriors who could bulldoze through the walls of the buildings, destroying her only advantage, would appear, as well as those possessing insidious aspects and arsenals of potent memories. In the end, she would be buried under a mountain of human flesh and torn apart. What do I do? Nephi's cut down an awakened warrior wielding a long spear, severed a mundane soldier in half, pushed through the rain of blood, and pierced the throat of a heavily armored swordsman. The enchanted plate armor could not stop her blade, parting in front of it like paper. She kicked the swordsman's body, sending it flying back to crush and maim a dozen hollow-eyed warriors. There was only a split second remaining before she would receive a blow on her back, spinning around. Nephi's sliced through the descending sword, the attacker's arms and his neck. What do I do? There were still thousands of enemies surrounding her. If anything, there were more of them now than there had been before. Despite the gruesome deaths of the first wave, their faces remained cold and emotionless. Their eerie eyes were full of emptiness and chilling malice. They were still advancing, aiming to bury her under an avalanche of bodies. Nephi's moved, knowing that she could not stay in place. She was faster than them after all, and although a wall of steel and flesh surrounded her from all sides, her sword was sharp enough to cut it down. She cut, pierced, and crushed. She calculated every move, both of her own and of her enemies, perfectly. She was 10 steps ahead in her calculations, even, plotting a bloody course through the flowing mob in advance. That was the only way not to drown in the flood. What do I do? Where was Sunny? Where was Cassie? What happened to Effie and Jet? Were they still alive, or had they already been taken as hosts by Soul Stealer? What about Kai? Had he escaped the trap of frozen time only to be devoured by the Mirror Fiend? What about Mordred of Valor? What had happened to him? Distracted by these thoughts, Nephi's allowed the tip of an enemy's spear to strike her shoulder. The chainmail shirt held, but the cadence of her fluid sword dance was thrown into disarray, forcing her to scramble and recalculate dozens of movements. What was she supposed to do? Surrounded by thousands of enemies, Nephi's looked ahead somberly. Then, furious white flames ignited in her eyes. Kill them all, I'll just kill them all. I'll try at least. Her sword flashed, countless lives turning to ash in the incandescent glow of its blade. Next. Somewhere far away, Mordred was in a similar situation. Of course, he did not possess the physical strength, speed, and resilience of Changing Star of the Immortal Flame clan. However, he did possess his own arsenal of tricks. I wonder. He had escaped into a section of the city where the ground had been broken by some titanic blow. Shallow water covered the cracked cobblestones, with ruined buildings rising from it like islands. The twilight sky reflected in the water, turning it into a beautiful painting of soft colors. Mordred was using the reflections to stay ahead of his pursuers. Countless human figures were surrounding him, their weapons hungry for his blood. If I try to possess one of them, what would happen? Usually he would have to bet his life against the soul of his victim, armed only with their reflected power. But these warriors had no souls. They had long been destroyed by Soul Stealer, that imposter. So, would Mordred have to battle against the soul of the defiled saint, or the reflection of the dead victim's soul? Whose power would he be able to reflect? He was both curious and reluctant to find out. Not just yet. At least. Dodging a swift sword, Mordred pierced the attacker's throat, dodged another strike, and jumped back. A subtle frown appeared on his face. Inconvenient. The worst part about slaughtering these hollow vessels was that they were just that, vessels. There were no souls inside the bodies of the taken warriors, and so he was not growing stronger from killing them. Otherwise, Mordred would have been able to slowly restore his monster core, maybe even the demon core, if he was diligent and lucky. With those, he could create a new reflection or two. Without them, things were proving difficult. He would have preferred slaughtering actual people instead. What was it that Sunless likes to say? He emotionlessly cut down a young woman wearing an archaic garment and sighed. Damnation. The ring of enemies surrounding him was growing tighter. He couldn't do much against them with one hand. All Mordred could do was flee. Stepping into the reflected sky, he appeared a few hundred meters away, in the middle of a furious clash between the vessels of Soul Stealer and a swarm of nightmare creatures that were still loyal to the Dread Lord. So the imposter has a limit too. Why hadn't Soul Stealer taken these abominations as well? Mordred smiled as he finished off a lumbering monstrosity. Finally, he felt his soul growing stronger. Was it because destroying the souls of those already taken by the defilement was harder? No, it wouldn't be. Mordred had slain plenty of nightmare creatures that way himself. So, it had to be because it was easier to destroy the souls of those who were not defiled. Why? He lingered suddenly. Don't tell me. Was it because those following the path of ascension could be infected by the defilement during the soul battle, all but dooming them to lose? Suddenly, he lost all curiosity about facing Soul Stealer. Becoming defiled. Mordred wanted none of that, because it ran contrary to his goals, of course, but mostly because the imposter was rather pathetic. Sure, Soul Stealer was mighty. Sure, he had reached the level of power that Mordred struggled to fathom. However, he was also a bit brainless. None of the warriors Mordred had killed showed a tenth of his skill with the sword. Gone were his cunning, his foresight, his resolve, and those were much more valuable than control over 1,000,000 clumsy flesh puppets. It seemed that corruption, or perhaps splitting his soul between countless beings, both humans and abominations alike, had rotted Soul Stealer's mind, turning him into a madman. And not even a brilliant madman at that, just a dull monster. Mordred would have loved to continue pondering the undeniable inferiority of his monstrous twin, but at that moment, his sword failed to penetrate the carapace of another nightmare creature. He had killed a few already, using the rest to stall the Soul Stealer's vessels, but this one had turned out to be more powerful than he thought. Ugh. As a sharp claw tore his chest open, Mordred grimaced and thrust his hand into the water. Then, he pulled a human body out of it, that of an awakened warrior wearing the colors of clan valor. The next moment, Mordred's eyes grew empty, while the warrior's eyes ignited with sinister intelligence. A moment after that, Mordred's own body plunged into the shallow water, disappearing from sight. Wearing the familiar body of Squire Warren, and wielding his aspect, he dove under the abomination's body and cut open its unprotected belly. A few dozen more, and I'll become a monster again. Mordred dashed away, escaping before the dying nightmare creature crushed him with its weight. It was okay if Warren's body was destroyed. He had plenty more to choose from, some of which he had hidden from Changing Star and her cohort. He could take the bodies of these abominations as well. But what was the point? As Mordred continued to coldly kill the defiled, his expression grew dim. So what if he killed them? So what if he regained a few soul cores? The situation was still inescapable. For once, he saw no way to survive, let alone win. Even his usual path of escape was cut off, since Soul Stealer was perfectly capable of haunting the reflections as well. Are we all going to die here, in this godforsaken city? Wasn't it a bit too ironic, poetic even, to die by his own hand? One thing kept Mordred's spirit up, though. It was that girl, Cassia, Song of the Fallen. She might have had others fooled, but he knew that the blind witch was not as simple as she looked. Someone like her had to have something planned, without a doubt. She wouldn't have led her companions here otherwise. But then again, Soul Stealer had gone through the same ritual as Mordred. Neither of them was easy to perceive through divination. How else would that monster have escaped Torment's gaze and rebelled against the dread Lord? I don't know. Mordred pushed an old man in weathered leather armor into the maw of a hideous nightmare creature, then pierced the creature's eye while it was busy devouring the poor fool. His expression was somber. At this point, we'll need a miracle to pull through. But when had the world been generous with miracles? If something truly astonishing happened, it was always a curse instead. Some distance away, Cassie had fled toward the breached walls of twilight. Here, there were more nightmare creatures fighting against the vessels of Soul Stealer, and therefore more mayhem and chaos. Using that chaos, Cassie was still struggling to keep herself alive. Blood was pouring from a deep wound on her neck. Pressing her hand against it, she moved through the terrible jumble of human and monstrous bodies, somehow avoiding all the swords, claws, and fangs. Sometimes she was only a split second away from death, but each time, that split second was somehow enough to save her. Her face was pale and bleak. An iron locket rested on her chest, wet with blood. How much time do I have left? She didn't know exactly. Far away, the Serpent King's palace shuddered, coming undone. There, in the ruins of the throne room, Sunny coiled his giant serpentine body around the dread lord, trying to crush his bones. His fangs were scratching the impenetrable midnight scales, leaving deep grooves on them. Die, die, you worm! Losing all reason, he could only think about tearing the odious dragon apart. However, Killing a defiled saint was not an easy task. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.